evening. My name is Catherine Louisa Balke Honesty. I've always said I was honest by marriage, not by inclination. My daughter Judith asked me to come here tonight, and I'm going to start with a little history lesson. In the latter part of the 19th century, the folks in the little town of Air Hill, Virginia, decided they wanted a Linden library. They wanted more than just that shelf of books at the local store. They wanted a building with lots of books for people of all ages. There was just one problem. They didn't have the money. It was the aftermath of the Civil War, and money was tight. So they asked folks to think about how they could raise that money for the library. And one man, he remembered he had an elderly, well-to-do uncle who lived up north. He wrote his uncle and asked him if he would be willing to finance the library. Well, the uncle wrote back and said indeed he would love to finance the library. And he only wanted one little thing in return. He wanted them to change the name of the town to Vienna, in memory of this wonderful experience that he had in Austria in his youth. So, Air Hill disappeared, and Vienna became a town in northern Virginia. And they built a beautiful little one-room library right on the corner of Center Street and Maple Avenue. It was perfectly square, white clapboard, green shutters, a green tin roof that came to a point right in the center. When you opened the door, the natural gold color of the wood just seemed to beckon you to come in and enjoy. Of course, the walls were covered in bookshelves right from the floor all the way up to the roof line, about 12 feet. And on the right-hand side were standing bookshelves. And on the left was a library table and chairs. Now my husband John and I, our 3 children, Carl, Johnny, Judy, and my father-in-law, Amato Honesty, all moved to Vienna in 1951. And I don't think the little library had changed much since it was first built. It still had a wood stove for heat in the wintertime. We did have electricity and a nice modern fan for cooling in the summertime. The library was run entirely by volunteers. There was a volunteer board of directors, and then volunteers kept the library open during the week. It was open Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday afternoons, and Thursday and Friday evenings. Thursdays and Fridays were the days that folks came to town from the country to do their errands. John and I, enjoyed the library so much and went often. And after a year or two, we were asked if we would be willing to volunteer and keep the library open on the first and third Friday evenings of the month, that the couple doing that were moving. We talked it over and we decided we might as well do it. We went to the library about every 2 weeks anyway. I tell you what though, it meant a fire drill for us on those nights, for John to get home from Washington, get some supper eaten, and get to the library and get it open by 6 p.m. But we managed it most of the time. And we had such a good time doing it. In those days, all you had to do to take the books out was to fill out a 3x5 card with your name and address on it. And if you had one, a telephone number. Not everyone in those days had a phone. And if you had one, it was a party line. That meant there were 10 families on the same phone line. And every family had their own ring. Ours was 2 shorts and a long. And theoretically, you only answered on your own ring, but every party line had at least 1 or 2 people who listened in on everyone's calls. I remember one time I was so angry. I had gotten a call in the evening about an elderly relative who was sick. And the next day I was at the grocery store and someone came up to me and said how sorry they were to hear that my relative was sick. Well, there was only one way they could have known about that illness. The party line got gossip around town faster than a cat with its tail on fire looking for water. It was terrible. When the phone company finally came out with private lines, they were more expensive. But for once in my life, I didn't care how much it cost. I was having a private line. I was tired of people listening on my calls. Now, once you had filled out that card, you could check out all the books you wanted. And everything went well. We enjoyed running the library. We met so many nice people. And everything went well for a year and a half or so, when a young woman who was coming on Friday nights decided to take her children to the library on Tuesday afternoon. Well, the volunteer that day had a fit. What were coloreds doing taking books out of the library? It's not allowed. And she took those books back from those children and would not allow them to have any more. That night, an emergency meeting of the board and all the volunteers was called. And we discussed the situation back and forth and back and forth. And at 12 o'clock, no decision had been made. And so the meeting was continued to the next night. And again, we discussed it for a couple of hours. And finally, the board said, we're making a decision. And they did. Friday night, we had the library open, and it must have been about 8:30 or so, the end of the evening. John and I and Judy were alone in the library when John looked outside and thought he saw someone standing out there, so he went to the door and looked, and sure enough, it was the minister of the colored church. He'd been sent as an emissary. He'd come as an emissary to see what had happened, and he was dressed in his best navy blue suit, white starched shirt, nice silk tie. John beckoned him to come in, sit down. And we told him the board's decision. Coloreds would not be allowed to check out books from the library. Then we told him our decision. Because you see, our decision was that as long as we were there, everybody was welcome to check out books. For his people to come only on the first and third Fridays, and to look in the window to be sure we were there, that nothing had happened to us. And if we were there, they could come in. If anybody else was in the library, they were not to come in. And that was the way the library ran until 1962, when it was completely shut down. In 1958, a group of us formed a Citizens Action Committee to bring a branch of the Fairfax County Library to Vienna. We had to raise money in order for the library to come, and we raised over $1,000 to bring the Fairfax Library to town. We gave that money to the Fairfax Library with the provision that the library would be open to all people. There are times in this life when no matter how hard you try, you can't change a situation. But sometimes you can make a difference.